Hey, what's going on, guys? Chael Sonnen did an interview with Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour where he discussed the Francis Ngannou situation and in particular Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou and kind of the future of Francis Ngannou. And in this interview, and I'm going to show you multiple clips throughout this video, Chael Sonnen outright embarrassed himself. He didn't need help from Ariel Helwani. Now, there was multiple times throughout this interview that Ariel Helwani embarrassed Chael Sonnen, but Chael Sonnen was basically spewing UFC propaganda the entire time. He showed off his true motive, which can be summed up with one quote from A Bug's Life, which we'll get to a little bit later. But throughout this interview, it just gets increasingly more unhinged from Chael Sonnen and just outright lying and just making statements that are just borderline confusing, but we're going to take a look at it all. Let's take a look at the first clip where Chael Sonnen honestly starts off this interview. He's not too bad. He's not too delusional, but Ariel Helwani pokes a little bit of fun at Chael Sonnen to start off the interview. Let's take a look.
Here's Chael back in July when the fight was announced, celebrating how great this was and putting his reputation on the line, saying that Francis is going to shock the world in this mega event. Take a look at this.
I will stand by this is the most lopsided sporting event, right? You're taking... Just so you guys understand, you're taking LeBron, Colby, rest his soul. You're taking the rest of the team. You're taking Phil Jackson. You're taking the great. You're taking the Lakers. They're great. And you're putting them against Manning and the Patriots, but you're doing it in football rules. That's exactly what you're doing here. That is ridiculous from a competitive standpoint.
So there you hear Ariel Helwani brings in Chael Sonnen. He plays a clip from Chael Sonnen where Chael Sonnen's kind of crapping on Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury. Now, I actually thought this was a poor choice of clip for Ariel Helwani because Chael's just kind of crapping on the competitiveness of the fight, which a lot of people had that opinion that they didn't think Francis Ngannou could go into boxing and have a competitive fight with the heavyweight boxing champ. And I'm sure there was plenty of other instances where Chael Sonnen was crapping on Francis Ngannou, but this one is like, okay, that's not a bad opinion to have. You know, a lot of people thought that, but I think the point that Ariel Helwani was trying to make here was the continual moving of the goalpost. At first, it was Francis Ngannou won't be able to sign with another MMA promotion. Then he signs a deal with PFL. And then it was PFL is going to go out of business and Francis didn't get that boxing fight he wanted. Then he signs the boxing fight. And then it was, oh, well, Francis is going to get KO'd here against Tyson Fury and he doesn't stand a chance. And then Francis Ngannou then has a competitive fight. And then basically now it's the new narrative. Well, he pulled off the unthinkable and it was a terrible pay-per-view anyway and it was a one-off anyway. I think that's the point he's trying to choose here. But what Chael Sonnen said wasn't necessarily that egregious. Along with the next clip we're going to take a look at. Let's take a look at it.
Where the buzz and the excitement, the celebration, appreciation, the headlines are more bountiful about the event after the event. And I bring that to you because, and your viewers know this to be true, though they will deny it today, they were not on Friday night having a hard time sleeping with excitement. They did not wake up early high on life because they were thrilled for a sporting event. They were not invited between three different parties where people were having them over. They were not at the water cooler the night before and trading around tickets. This, from a business standpoint and the pay-per-view numbers, it bombed. But it did what people thought that it would do. It wasn't expected to be a great event. It turned out to be wildly competitive, and it was incredible. That's the accurate story.
So there, Chael Sonnen says, nobody really cared about this pay-per-view. Nobody was excited for this pay-per-view, and it did horrible at the box office. It didn't sell any pay-per-view buys. Now, we don't know the truthfulness of what the pay-per-view buys did or didn't do. We don't have that information just yet. But what Chael is relatively saying here is actually accurate. He starts off okay in this interview. It's not crazy delusion. But the point is, Chael Sonnen has crapped on Francis Ngannou for so long, he just can't let it go. He just can't let it go. No matter what happens, and I've told you guys this for the last year myself, no matter what happens, they will continue to move the goalpost. And Chael Sonnen does it multiple times throughout this interview. But in these particular first two clips, there's not a whole lot I can argue with Chael Sonnen with. What he's saying is basically accurate, and I have no problem with him thinking, oh, this fight isn't going to be competitive, and I have no problem with him saying, oh, well, nobody cared about the pay-per-view prior, even though I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think some people cared, but it wasn't some 2 million pay-per-view buy type pay-per-view. But then you get into the next clip. Ariel Helwani asks him, was Francis right? And then let's take a look at the clip, and then we'll come back and react to it.
Can you now admit that he was right and everyone else was wrong?
No, but if he said he was, I would. If he came in and said, hey, Ariel, in this amount of time that I've set out, which was almost 2 years, I mean, it was 3 months shy of 2 years, so a year and 9 months. In that amount of time, statistically speaking, I would have had 4 fights within the UFC. Shave one off, I would have had 5 fights. Let's call it 4 with my new participation since I was champion. If I was to look at the number in terms of dollars, that would have been larger than what I got against Fury. It's one of those things. But if he came out and said, I don't care about the money, it was about competition, it was about proving something and living a dream, then I would fully listen to him.
He did say
I would
that.
always respect somebody.
He did say that. It was about the
I haven't heard him say it. If he came out and said that it was about competition, which so rare times it is in our sport, sadly, I would love that.
So there you hear Chael Sonnen start to push a false narrative regarding Francis Ngannou. Well, if he would have been active in the UFC, he would have had 5 fights, but let's call it 4. He would have made more money than he made boxing Tyson Fury, which honestly, it's just disingenuous. He's just pushing a false narrative because first off, there's no guarantee that he would have made more. It's very likely had he been active for the last 2 years and at least he won the first fight against John Jones, okay, he would have made more than the $10 million that he made against Tyson Fury, just that one fight. But that would have been over the course of 3 or 4 fights, maybe even 5 fights according to Chael. And also, it makes absolutely no sense. And Ariel Helwani calls it out later. I'm not sure if I have it in the clips for you or not. But that totally ignores the fact that Francis Ngannou had a torn ACL. He wasn't sitting on the shelf for the last 2 years just because he wanted to sit on the shelf. He had a torn ACL. And then he goes on to say, if Francis just wanted to box and this was a dream of his and it was about being a competitor, then I totally understand. Francis Ngannou has literally said that multiple times over the last couple years. I don't know what Chael is paying attention to, but, you know, Francis Ngannou has said for years it was a dream of his to box and potentially box guys like Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, so on and so forth. Let's take a look at the next clip where Chael really starts to set the tone of what his real motive is here. Let's take a look.
The way that you're speaking is putting out a tone that if other fighters hear, I can do this to get to that. Look, this was a real rare thing. First off, it was not a great night of business. And second off, you had an entity, not a promoter, not a district, nothing unique with our sport. You had an entity who going into it was willing to lose. So it's a unique spot where did everything get played out and he pulled something off? I would not say anything negative about Francis or what he did. I'm part of the celebration party. But your message that this was a financial win, they're going to do it again. Just look, come on, man, you're not right.
No, well, financial win for who? For Francis, yes. Let's say he made in the 10 to 20 million range, right, as has been reported.
So there you hear Chael really start to push his motive. No other fighters can do this. This was a rarity here. And that may very well be true. That may very well be true. I believe it to be true. Ariel Helwani believes it to be true. Doesn't even argue with him on that respect. But he just continues to shit on the event and can't admit that Francis Ngannou made a great decision, what was best for him. He continues to say, oh, this was bad business. They lost money because Saudi Arabia is so rich, they paid to have this event put on in the middle of the daytime where they're not going to sell a whole lot of pay-per-views. And they didn't care about selling a whole lot of pay-per-views. They just want to buy up sports. That's essentially what's been going on there with different types of sports. It's not just MMA. It's not just combat sports in general, boxing, whatever you want to say. It's with golf and other things. Saudi Arabia just wants to have these big events because they have money to throw around. They don't care. They don't care, Chael. But Chael just has to keep harping on because, again, the goalposts continue to move. Well, he might have got everything he wanted, but pay-per-view buys were horrible. No other fighter could ever do this, which we don't know that to be true at all. If Francis Ngannou can do it, I'm not saying every other fighter can do it, but it's possible for other fighters to do it. But the point for Chael Sonnen, and we're going to see this multiple times throughout this interview, is telling fighters, you can't stand up to the UFC. You can't ever do what Francis Ngannou did. That is Chael's entire point. Now, this next clip, Chael Sonnen starts to make a good point because Ariel Helwani says, well, what do you know about the pay-per-view sales? Well, what's your source? And Chael starts to make a really good point, and then he has an absolute embarrassing moment regarding Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. Let's take a look.
History matters. There's not a pay-per-view, whether it was wrestling, whether it was motocross, whether it was a concert, whether it was fighting. There's not a pay-per-view in history that is broken into the top 10, which this would have to do, that comes on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. In all fairness, I work for the company that put this out. I plan to watch the fight. I thought it was coming on at 7 p.m. like a regular time. I was in a text message with Kevin Iole on unrelated matters when he told me I got to go. The fight's coming on.
No, I
So
mean,
don't pretend.
in a million years,
Don't
why
pretend.
would a fight in Saudi Arabia happen at 7 p.m. Pacific time? What are you talking about?
You know where Abu Dhabi is?
Yes, I'm aware of where Abu Dhabi is. Yes.
Did you watch Volkanovski versus Islam a week before?
Yes, also happened in the middle of the day.
Well, nobody knows. See, that's the problem.
What
Here,
is
is we're debating.
It happened at
nobody
2
that
p.m.
knows.
Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. What are you talking about?
So there, Chael Sonnen says, well, the pay-per-views couldn't have possibly done well because they were in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday, which is a fair point. Pay-per-view sales aren't going to do great in the middle of an afternoon on a Saturday, considering the majority of pay-per-view sales usually come from North America. But then he goes on to say, well, what about Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski? It was in Abu Dhabi. You aware where Abu Dhabi is? And Ariel Helwani says to him, yeah, and it was on at 2 p.m. in the afternoon on a Saturday. Because what Chael was going to say is, well, the UFC, when they went to Abu Dhabi, they put it on at night. And you could see Chael it completely embarrasses himself. He said, oh, yeah, well, that's the point. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. If I would have been Ariel, I would have been like, are you saying UFC 294 bombed? Even that was a really good card. You're telling me that bombed on pay-per-view as well? Because Chael really just slipped up there. He was thinking he was going to make an excellent point, but then he really just fell over himself because he forgot that the fight was on in the middle of the afternoon. He didn't realize. He was going to say that UFC 294 was on at night because the UFC is so smart. Even though the UFC goes to Abu Dhabi every single year and has a pay-per-view on in the middle of the afternoon in North America because they have a deal with the Abu Dhabi government and they make a crap ton of money from them. They're not worried about pay-per-view sales. Now, Chael Sonnen goes on with a common theme throughout this entire interview, and we're really going to see it in the next clip where Ariel asks him, well, how much money do you think he's going to make in his next fight? Let's take a look at that clip.
What do you think he's going to make? Like, how can you continue? I saw you talk to MMA Junkie on Monday. You said he still fumbled the bag. Is that true? That was a misquote.
It's very hard.
It's a misquote,
It's very
right?
hard, Ariel. I don't think that you're this dumb. I think you're making TV.
Nah.
But it gets my sweat going. No, you're going to let me talk. When you come out and say stupid and reckless things, and you have people that are relying on you, you're going to let me talk. So you came out and you want to make believe the 10 million. My problem with you saying that he made more in this than he made in all of his UFC fights, my problem is that you use the word made. If you were to be honest and you were to say he got, I'm with you. When it's a loss, right? When it's charity or somebody gives it away, it's very difficult to say that you made it. I share that with you because you're asking me about his next fight. Why would you have that conversation? You know full well he has a contract. So as far as what he's going to make in his next fight, he already has a contract.
So there, Chael says, well, he didn't make it. He was given it. And that's because Saudi Arabia didn't care about making money on the event. All they cared about was throwing together a massive spectacle. Francis Ngannou still got paid for his services. So that entire argument from Chael Sonnen is just downright idiotic. Francis Ngannou got paid to show up and box, and that is exactly what he did. He made $10 million plus pay-per-view points plus sponsorship as well. Francis Ngannou probably made somewhere close to $15 million, which is a whole nother part of the interview. You might see some of it in the clips. But Chael argues with Ariel because Ariel said 10 to 20 million. We're not going to get into that whole argument because it's really not that relevant because we don't know the actual numbers yet. So we're just kind of speculating. But you hear Chael say, well, why are we talking about what his next fight is? Because he already signed a contract with PFL. Essentially what Chael is saying is no matter what, he's fighting in PFL in his next fight, and he's only going to make what PFL is paying him, which is around $10 million a fight, which is still amazing for Francis Ngannou. But that's not the case. He's not locked up with PFL. PFL gave him the freedom to box, so he may very well box in his next fight. Now, Chael goes on to say, oh, well, no promoter is going to sign you unless you're signed into a 3-fight deal. Let's take a look at that clip.
These deals aren't one-offs. They're 3-offs. And you're not going to get a guy to sign a contract for the next fight and the next one, promising you if there's not an escalation. You can't promise too big of an escalation because you don't know if he's going to win the previous one. It gets complicated, and you don't understand that.
And here's the part that you don't understand. You keep talking about the entity. It's right in your face, and you're blowing right by it. You're applying 2010 rules, 2000 rules to 2023. These are new rules. These are Saudi Arabia rules. They don't play by the same rules that you're used to. They don't play by the same rules as Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum. They could do whatever the fuck they want. They just paid, and to your point, probably lost a lot of money, right, to bring in all these guys to put on this event. It was the Super Bowl on steroids. and they'll do it again.
So that is a narrative that Chael Sonnen has come back to multiple times throughout this interview. And by the way, I'm going to link the full interview down in the description if you want to go check it out for full context. I'm only showing you clips here and there. But Chael Sonnen keeps harping on, no promoter's going to sign him unless it's a 3-fight deal. No promoter's going to sign him. That's the industry standard, which you'll see in other clips throughout this video. And it is just the dumbest argument, and Ariel Helwani easily just destroys the entire argument in 2 seconds. Well, this is new. This isn't industry standard. This is what Saudi Arabia is doing now. They just did it with Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou. They've already said they'll do it again. So what is the point you're trying to make? But Chael keeps coming back to, you're just arguing semantics and saying, well, the industry standard is a 3-fight deal, and there's no one that's going to sign Ngannou for a 3-fight deal because he's kind of unknown and he's 0-1. It makes absolutely no sense because this isn't what's going on anymore. Saudi Arabia is willing to throw out dumb money to have guys come over there and fight just for the spectacle of it all. It's new rules. It's not the rules that Chael Sonnen's talking about from the last few years. It is different now, and it's been clear as day for the last, Saturday was literally a perfect example of that. And Chael he just has to find a way to shit on Francis Ngannou. He can't concede the fact that Francis Ngannou made the best business decision for himself. Now, in the next clip, Chael continues to paint a narrative that is his entire motive for shitting on Francis Ngannou from the beginning. Let's take a look at that clip.
There's not a word of what you just said with the tone and narrative that you wanted to be interpreted that was correct.
What?
Your message since I've got on here today, Ariel, your message has been that this is good business, which would seep into somebody else's mind. If some other fighter attempted to do this, they need to know the dangers of being a lone wolf. And that is my message.
So basically, Chael Sonnen is now scalding Ariel Helwani because he's saying, Ariel, you're trying to convince other fighters to try to follow the same path of Francis Ngannou. And this isn't a good idea. This isn't a good business decision for them. So why are you trying to push this narrative? But I've not really seen Ariel Helwani push that narrative that other people should try to do what Francis Ngannou did. And he makes it very clear throughout the interview he doesn't believe that other fighters should. So I don't know why Chael Sonnen is continuing to push this, but the only reason that makes sense, and we already kind of know, is because the UFC and Chael Sonnen are basically one and the same. Chael Sonnen is a UFC shill. He will always shill for the UFC. And the UFC does not want fighters to try to do what Francis Ngannou did. They don't want fighters to stand up and try to do what's best for them. So Chael Sonnen is going on this media tour, and he has been for the last year regarding Francis Ngannou, where he's saying, you shouldn't do this. Nobody should do this. No fighter should ever do this. And then he continues to harp on the three fights on a contract. Now, that wasn't necessarily in the clip, but he continues to harp on that throughout this entire interview. And it's just straight up embarrassing. He keeps saying, oh, the industry standard and and he's just trying to shit on Francis Ngannou every chance he can get because he has to continue to move the goalposts. No matter what Ngannou does, it's not a success. No matter what he does, in Chael's mind, it will never be a success because he went against the UFC, and Chael Sonnen is deep-throating Dana White every chance he gets. Now, in the next clip, we're going to see Chael flat out and say Ariel's encouraging other fighters to follow Francis Ngannou's path. Let's take a look.
And I don't know why you keep trying to change the story and make it ugly about money. Francis had the money. That's not the story here. Had Francis gone down in the first round where the result would have been the same, he would have lost. He'd still be 0-1 and not boxing in his next match. Be the same, but he didn't do that. He went out there and competed. He tried to bring honor to himself. He tried to show that this dream could come true. That's the story of this fight. Your message is to try to tell other fighters and hedge them into going into that direction. Ariel, it's not true. It's not what you mean. You've stumbled over your own words here multiple times.
I said it at the beginning of the show.
From a competitive standpoint, he exceeded expectations. From a financial standpoint, he met expectations. This was a loss.
So there, Chael is trying to push the narrative that Francis Ngannou didn't make any more money than he would have made in the UFC, which is just factually incorrect. You can say, oh, well, if he would have signed on for the Jones fight, maybe he would have made 10 million plus pay-per-view points. Maybe he would have made a little bit more. But then if he didn't win that fight, it's right back to a shitty contract, basically. So Chael's pushing that narrative. And then he's saying, Ariel, you're just trying to convince other fighters to do this. I don't understand this borderline false narrative. Maybe I'm wrong on this. You guys will have to let me know down in the comments. That Ariel Helwani somehow controls every fighter on the UFC roster. Is Ariel Helwani actively convincing every fighter on the roster to try and go get a boxing fight? Is that what he's genuinely doing? Does he have that type of power? I don't understand. How is it Ariel Helwani's fault that any fighter might want to go box eventually? I really don't get that, and that's something that has been regurgitated by the MMA community. I've seen Ariel sharing tweets recently saying, Ariel ruined Francis Ngannou's career. I don't understand this narrative that somehow Ariel Helwani has the end-all, be-all control of every fighter's career. It makes absolutely no sense. And basically, Chael just continues to push that. And you have in this next clip something very interesting from Ariel Helwani. And I'm going to dissect it because I think it's a little bit of sarcasm, but let's take a look.
You're missing the greater point. If he would have gone knocked out in the first round, you would be right. Okay, you bet on yourself. Forget the PFL deal. Forget the Tyson Fury fight that no one thought you could get.
No, you'd be the one that's right.
But now,
you'd be the one that's right.
Now he's going to get a massive deal. Now you've got Eddie Hearn on his knees begging for him to fight Anthony Joshua. Now you've got Turkey in Saudi Arabia saying, I have an offer on the table. You think they want him back if he truly slipped on a banana peel on Saturday? No way do they want him back. You think PFL's trying to do a Deontay Wilder fight? No, they're having him fight Ante Delelli at the Hulu Theater in front of 6 people on ESPN Plus pay-per-view in front of 5 people. But now he's the most wanted man in combat sports because of what happened. That's what makes this a bigger deal financially. That's what makes this a success.
So there's a very interesting clip from Ariel Helwani where he says, had Francis Ngannou got knocked out in the first round, you would have been right. Forget about the PFL deal. Forget about the fact that he boxed Tyson Fury. You would have been right. And I believe he was being sarcastic here because the Francis Ngannou haters were waiting to dance on his grave if he got finished by Tyson Fury because, again, they continued to move the goalpost. It was, oh, he'll never sign with another MMA promotion. If he does, he'll never get the money that the UFC was offering him. Oh, he'll never get a boxing match against a interesting boxer, against a big high-profile boxer. He gets that, and then they're like, oh, well, he's going to get finished by him. And then Francis Ngannou goes out there and has a competitive fight against Tyson Fury. It just completely destroyed their brains. They don't know where to move the goalpost now. So what they're saying is, well, the chances of this happening were so unlikely. This would have never happened ever. And that's what people are doing. And I think that's what Ariel Helwani is referencing. But even let's say Ariel Helwani's not saying that. Let's say he believed if Francis Ngannou got KO'd here, it was the end of Francis Ngannou, which I don't believe is true at all. I made a video a week before the fight and I said, if Francis Ngannou gets finished in the first or second round against Tyson Fury, it's literally irrelevant. It's a win-win for Francis Ngannou. He got the biggest contract in MMA heavyweight history with PFL. He had a 3-fight non-restrictive deal where he had the freedom to box, and he fulfilled his dreams of boxing a high-profile boxer. So it didn't matter if he got finished. It didn't matter if he never boxed again. He made more in one boxing match than he made his entire UFC career. No matter what happened against Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou won. But the people who doubted him, the people who hated him, were waiting. Oh, when he gets finished by Tyson Fury, the narrative was going to be, and I literally did a video a week before the fight. The narrative was going to be, oh, he got knocked out by Tyson Fury. He's irrelevant now. Nobody's ever going to talk about him again. Then everyone would have continued to talk about him throughout his PFL career as well, and they would have tuned in and watched him in PFL as well. So the entire narrative is just completely delusional, but it doesn't matter now. Because guess what? He went in there against Tyson Fury. He had a super competitive fight. So guess what? He's going to get another boxing match. He may make 20 million, 30 million, 40 million in his next boxing fight. Then he still has his PFL deal to fall back on. And people keep saying, oh, there's no interesting opponents. Okay, you want to work harder for your money? If Francis Ngannou can go in there and fight 3 bums and make $10 million a piece, why is that so bad? Why is that so bad? You have champions in the UFC that are actively ducking contenders. I don't see you guys complaining about that. Oh, Sean O'Malley wants Marlon Vera over Merab, who's the rightful #1 contender. You're not complaining about that. These fighters want the most winnable fights for the highest paycheck. End of story. I don't care what you guys believe and have a delusion about. Oh, every fighter wants to fight. I want to fight the toughest guys. That's just not true. They want the biggest paycheck and the easiest fight. That is what most of these fighters want. That's what almost the entirety of the roster wants. So I don't want to hear, oh, he's going to fight irrelevant guys in PFL, and he's going to collect a $10 million paycheck for it. So it literally, no matter what, Francis Ngannou, win or lose against Tyson Fury, he already won. Now, in this next clip I'm going to show you, Chael Sonnen continues to harp on 3-fight contract, 3-fight contract, 3-fight contract. Ariel Helwani continues to push back. And then eventually Ariel just completely bodies him and embarrasses him. Well, if that's the case, then how did he just get this fight against Tyson Fury? Let's take a look at the clip.
And the answer to your question is no. He will not get signed with your likely suspects if you don't have a multi-fight deal.
So how did he do it on
Because you
Saturday?
lack significance.
So how did he do it
Ariel.
on Saturday?
You lack significance. The fight has got to be about something.
So how did he do it on Saturday?
How did Francis do?
Yeah, no, how did he do it? How did he have a fight on Saturday against Tyson Fury without signing to a promoter?
Well, first off, you had a sanction by the WBC whose president sat in the front row but didn't put the title up. I mean, not for nothing. You had a lot of really weird things here.
So there, Ariel literally breaks Chael's brain. Well, then how did he do it Saturday? Chael's so adamant that Francis Ngannou is not going to get another boxing match because there's no way any promoter is going to sign him. Well, how did he do it just this past Saturday? And then Chael Sonnen starts to throw out, oh, the sanctioning body and this and that. And then he goes on to talk about the title, which we'll take a look at a clip in a minute. But what Chael Sonnen is doing here is called dish galloping, which means throw out a million different arguments because there's no way I can go against every single one of them. There's too many coming out of your mouth for me to actively diffuse every single wrong argument that you're throwing out and false narrative that you're pushing out. And it's just, Chael Sonnen's an embarrassment. The way he continued to harp on 3-fight contract, 3-fight contract, 3-fight contract. He is just finding any way to discredit Francis Ngannou. He's finding any way to rain on the parade over and over and over again. And when Ariel says, okay, well, you say you can't do this, how did he just do it this past Saturday? You hear Chael pause for a second, then he asks a question. It's almost like Dana White saying, Lene, I didn't quite hear you. That's Chael Sonnen's version of Dana White at the press conference. When he hears a question he doesn't want to answer, he pretends not to hear it and then says, Lene, what did he say? That's what Chael was doing there. And he outright embarrassed himself. I don't know why he kept harping on 3-fight deal, when Saudi Arabia is already willing to pay Francis Ngannou to come back for another boxing match. That is already being reported by Francis Ngannou himself. There's already an offer on the table for March for him to have another boxing match. There is a million different options, and Chael just kept harping on industry standards, and it's a lot of nonsense from Chael Sonnen, and people look at Chael Sonnen because of the way he talks. He presents it in a way that, man, he sounds real confident about this. He must be right. And he's not right at all. Let's take a look at the next clip where he basically talks more about industry standards.
I've literally never had you be this kind of stupid before. I'm not using other people's words.
You keep
I'm
insulting me.
yours.
You keep insulting me to try to win this argument,
lying.
and I keep proving you wrong and providing facts.
You haven't
His
proved
Excellency
it once yet,
Turkey
Ariel.
Al-Sheikh
Why was the WBC title not up?
Because Francis.
Why did the Why did the WBC champion fight? Shut up. Why did the WBC champion fight and not put his title up? And tell me another time in heavyweight history that's happened.
So there, Chael Sonnen continues to gish gallop. Well, what about the belt? Why is this? When has there ever been a title not on the line? And blah, blah, blah. He didn't go in the industry standards. That's actually in the next clip. But this guy is just throwing nonsense, just throwing shit at the wall and praying that he can overwhelm Ariel Helwani. It doesn't matter that the belt was on the line. The belt being on the line has nothing to do with the fact that Francis Ngannou made a decision, a business decision that was best for him. And it's going to lead to even crazier and bigger paychecks for Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou couldn't have navigated his career any better if he tried. If Chael Sonnen was navigating Francis Ngannou's career, he would have made substantially less money. But here is Chael. He's got to be the UFC company guy, and Ariel calls him out on it. He has to be the company guy. He has to continue to push the narrative. You can't be successful outside the UFC. That is what Chael Sonnen is trying to push here. That no fighter, it doesn't matter what your popularity is, it doesn't matter what your accolades is, it doesn't matter if you're a champion, it doesn't matter what you've done, you cannot be successful without the UFC. And Chael's pushing that narrative because I believe, and we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, I believe Chael Sonnen is on the UFC's payroll. I believe he's in constant communication with Dana White, and he pushes out narratives because Dana White wants him to push out these narratives. Chael Sonnen is a UFC shill. Now, in this next clip we're going to take a look at, you'll see Chael talking more about industry standard. Let's take a look.
Everything that you just laid out, while being accurate, is against standards of the industry.
Oh,
for somebody, if they wanted to be strategic, they wanted to sit down with a manager or an agent and or a promoter and try to lay out a viable and reasonable plan. Each thing that you said is one-offs. It's never happened before.
So there you hear Chael say, This isn't industry standard. This what happened with Francis Ngannou isn't industry standard. It doesn't matter. It happened. It's going to happen again now. You have been proven wrong, but you're continuing to fall back on an argument that this isn't industry standard. This is an abnormality, which nobody's saying it's not, but it's going to happen again. It just happened, and Chael just continues to fall back on this argument. And it seems like half the interview, you have to go check out the full interview. I sat through, I think it was 52 minutes. I sat through it twice to do this video. Sat through it twice. And he continues to say over and over and over again, well, this isn't industry standard. He's literally arguing semantics. He's arguing irrelevant details. He's throwing out nonsense to try to get Ariel off the point he's trying to prove. And it's just an embarrassment. It's an outright embarrassment. But then Chael actually does something that I enjoyed. But he does dance around it a little bit, and then Ariel Helwani calls him out for that. Chael Sonnen calls out Ariel Helwani for his anti-UFC bias. Let's take a look at that clip.
Francis did a great job, and so did Fury, and we should have made it about competition instead of you trying to damage the bigger guys that you think somewhere around the way wronged you. And you know what, partner?
No.
They probably did. But for you to mislead your audience that was a good business move to let somebody else lose money, but it's what I got. Fair enough, partner.
Now I get
Play the lottery for your retirement
I get
plan.
it.
Words
I get it.
by Ariel Helwani.
I get what you're doing. I get what you're doing. You don't have the balls to come out and say it, so I'll say it for you. What you're trying to say is that I have a grudge against the UFC and Dana White, and that's why I'm trying to spin this into a narrative that Francis won. You danced around it.
So there you hear Chael Sonnen essentially say, he alludes to, he doesn't come out right and say it, but then Ariel Helwani says, well, why don't you just come out and say it? This is what you're saying. Chael Sonnen says, you're only pushing Francis Ngannou to hurt the UFC. And I've heard this narrative regurgitated by fans, and I understand that Ariel Helwani does have an anti-UFC bias. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people make it out to be, but I do believe Ariel loses some credibility because he does dislike the UFC. But my question to these people, including Chael Sonnen, who constantly say, Ariel's only pushing Francis Ngannou because he hates the UFC, how does Francis Ngannou failing, which is what you guys all said he was going to do, how does him leaving the UFC, imagine Francis Ngannou leaves the UFC, Ariel Helwani has full control over Francis Ngannou's entire career. How does Ngannou leaving the UFC and falling flat on his face do anything but help the UFC? Because it sets a narrative and sets control over fighters. Don't try what Francis Ngannou did. Francis Ngannou left, and look what now he's achieved. And that's a narrative, and that's a story the UFC doesn't want told. So Ariel Helwani's saying, look, what Francis Ngannou did, it's, historic, it's crazy. And he even goes on to say, and we'll look at a clip in a minute, I don't think every fighter should do this, but look what Francis Ngannou did. I just don't understand if Ariel has this ungodly power over fighters to make them leave the UFC and attempt to box. How does that help Ariel against the UFC at all if they fall flat on their face? And in this case, Francis Ngannou, against everyone saying it, did not fall flat on his face. He's going to make probably 10 times, 15 times the amount of money he would have made in the UFC. He's going to make it in less fights as well. So I really just don't understand that narrative. If somebody has an answer to that, let me know down in the comments. Ariel Helwani's pushing fighters to go box to hurt the UFC. How does that hurt the UFC if they don't succeed? Because at the end of the day, fighters are going to go where their money is. It doesn't matter what Ariel Helwani says. Francis Ngannou is going to go where he can make more money, where he can have more freedom, where he gets more versatility in his contract. It's just a dumb argument overall, and it makes absolutely no sense. Let's take a look at the next clip because there's more discussion about other fighters taking the same path as Francis Ngannou.
You didn't say it. You didn't say that. You didn't say that. You didn't quite say it.
You think I danced around it?
Oh, you danced around it.
I called you flat the F out on it. What do you mean I danced around?
You didn't have the guts.
I hit you in the face with
you didn't
like
have the guts to say it, so I'll say it for you.
I don't have the guts
You didn't have the guts to say it.
I'm the one that
Rewind this video
prick.
3 hours ago. Rewind this video 3 hours ago, and I was asked the first question of the day was, should other UFC fighters do this? And I said no. Not only will it not happen, I don't think it's a smart idea, and I don't think it's going to play out the way it did for Francis. Francis is an anomaly, and I even asked Markel that same question. So you think that I have this vendetta against UFC, that I'm going to try to unionize the fighters to go out? It would be incredibly dumb.
So there, Ariel Helwani says, look, I'm not convincing every fighter to do this. I don't think every fighter should do this. I don't think every fighter will be successful at doing this. But it's pushed on Ariel Helwani like he has some massive control over the entire UFC roster. I don't understand where people get this idea that Ariel can control the UFC roster. He's going to convince them to attempt to go box, which most of them won't even have that opportunity, and that somehow hurts the UFC. What Dana White, the UFC, and Chael Sonnen and people who align with Chael Sonnen are really thinking is, we have to shut down this narrative. Conor McGregor started it in 2016. Francis Ngannou now has took a different approach. He now fought out his contract and went and got paid more than he would have ever got paid in the UFC, and will make massive paydays from here on out in boxing. And what Chael Sonnen wants to do is he wants to shut down that option. He wants to tell fighters and set a narrative on the biggest platform, which is the MMA Hour for the most part, for MMA media, that you can't go and do that. You can't be inspired by Francis Ngannou, because there are going to be fighters that aren't convinced by Ariel Helwani, but they're looking at what Francis Ngannou was able to achieve, and they're thinking, maybe I can achieve that. And it's not going to be your bottom of the barrel fighters. It's not going to be your mid-tier fighters. It's going to be the fighters who become superstars. People like Sean O'Malley, if he continues to win and becomes a massive superstar, he's already kind of setting the narrative where, oh, I want to go box eventually. I want to go box eventually. And that's what the UFC is terrified of. That is what Chael Sonnen is trying to combat here. He's doing the UFC's bidding because he's saying, look, it's not going to be these mid-tier fighters. It's not going to be these bottom-of-the-barrel guys. It's going to be the UFC superstars that are going to be inspired by Francis Ngannou, who are going to have the opportunity to box. The fighters are going to go where the money is. The highest paydays in boxing are significantly higher than the paydays in the UFC for champions. Why do you think all these champions are always talking about boxing? Sean Strickland recently talking about boxing. Sean O'Malley talking about boxing. Kamaru Usman was talking about boxing. And there's countless other examples of UFC champions talking about boxing. Well, why would they want to go to boxing if they weren't going to get a bigger payday? That is the whole point. So Chael Sonnen's whole entire narrative is just to shut this down. You cannot be successful without the UFC. And what Chael Sonnen is doing here, and I've made this reference before, it's like a bug's life. If you remember the bug's life, they say, you let one ant stand up, they might all stand up. And then there goes our way of life. Francis Ngannou may inspire other fighters to do the same. And the only people who are going to be able to do that in the UFC are top tier fighters. Fighters who become pay-per-view draws. They're the only fighters that are going to be able to do that. And they're going to be looking at Francis Ngannou. They're going to see what Francis Ngannou was able to do outside the UFC. And they're going to say, you know what? I want to try that now. And Chael Sonnen is working for the UFC to try to combat that narrative because he wants to shut it down before it even starts. That is exactly what Chael Sonnen is doing here because he's a UFC shill. Now in this next clip, I only have a couple more clips for you. And I'm sorry that this video is so long. But Ariel Helwani calls out Chael Sonnen for his YouTube channel, which I absolutely love. Let's take a look.
And yet you are trying to spin this narrative so that you can get a couple of high fives on your YouTube channel later and say, you really stuck it to Ariel. You really exposed him. No, I know the score and I know exactly what happened. Francis Ngannou went out there and bet on himself and got one of the best deals that he could possibly get from the PFL. And then he got it while everyone was shitting on him, including yourself. And let's be honest, you have a grudge against him. You've talked about this. You guys almost came to blows in Dallas. You've talked about this on your YouTube channel. So there's a vendetta there too. There's probably a little bit of a, bad blood between you, and it's probably in your best interest to continue to shit on him. And I understand that. But what you are saying is incredibly, incredibly reckless because you're ignoring the fact that $10 million is not a win for a guy in the UFC. No one's making $10 million if you're not named Conor McGregor. And then the money he's about to make the next time around.
So there, Ariel calls him out for his YouTube channel. And I've had this theory for a long time. And I understand everyone's trying to make money off their YouTube channel. But what Chael Sonnen does is he puts out blatant UFC propaganda. Whatever UFC narrative that the UFC's in favor of, that's what Chael Sonnen puts out on his YouTube channel. And what he does is he goes to his YouTube studio, he batch records about 25 videos, and he pumps them out. He talks in circles because he's trying to get all that ad revenue. And the sad thing about MMA is Ariel Helwani is one of the biggest names in MMA. Outside of some of the big superstars like Conor McGregor and other big names within the sport, Ariel Helwani is a massive name in MMA media and just the MMA sports world as a whole. And so Chael Sonnen, what he's going to do, and I'm sure he's already done, I haven't gone and checked just yet, but he's going to go and make 15 videos about Ariel Helwani because Chael Sonnen is he's not looking to put out any quality content. All he's looking to do is push UFC narratives and collect that ad revenue. And I'm so glad that Ariel Helwani called him out on that. Oh, you're just looking for high fives on your YouTube channel. Oh, you really told Ariel, because they use Ariel Helwani's name to generate clicks. Because outside of Conor McGregor, Dana White, and some of the other bigger stars, Right below that is Ariel Helwani. Ariel Helwani is bigger than 90% of the UFC roster. Yes, I said that. Ariel's bigger. Ariel's more notable in the MMA community than Chael Sonnen. I don't care what anyone says. And they use his name for clicks. That's what they do time and time and time again. And that's why this whole narrative has kind of been put on Ariel Helwani. And Chael did it multiple times throughout this interview. And I'm glad that Ariel say, how are you going to downplay $10 million for Francis Ngannou? How are you going to downplay that? And then he goes on to kind of call out Chael Sonnen a little bit more. Let's take a look at that.
So you can dance around everything you want, but next time, do me a favor, Chael. Don't fucking be a don't be a fucking coward and dance around this shit. Say it to my face. Say it to my face like a man, because that's how I know you. Say it to my face and say, no, Ariel, you have a vendetta, you have a bias against the UFC, and that's why you're doing this. Say it to my face. Grow a fucking pair. And I'll say to you, you have a bias and a vendetta against Francis, and you're a company man, and you work for ESPN, and you don't want to upset Big Bad Dana because he's done some really nice things to you over the years. So you have your bias, I have mine. The best part about this story is we know how it played out. Francis won. He didn't have to pay a penny. He didn't have to lose a dime.
So there you hear Ariel kind of call Chael Sonnen out and say, look, you're a company man. You don't want to upset Dana. And that is 100% the truth. Chael Sonnen wants to do whatever Daddy Dana wants him to do. And this stems from probably multiple things throughout their personal relationship. But if you go back to when Chael Sonnen got suspended for PEDs, at the end of that suspension, the UFC ripped up Chael Sonnen's contract. They let him out of his contract so he could go fight elsewhere. Well, why would they do that? Chael Sonnen's a big star. He's a pay-per-view draw. Because Chael Sonnen off of PEDs was going to completely melt. So Chael Sonnen basically had two options. If he was going to his UFC contract, he would have to come back completely deflated and unable to compete because he wasn't using PEDs. He would have to fulfill his contract with the UFC and outright embarrass himself and devalue himself. Or he could talk to the UFC and Dana White, convince them to cut him from his contract. Then he could use PEDs other places where USADA was non-existent. And I think that's what it really comes down to. Chael is super loyal to the UFC because for what they did for him in the past, which I don't blame him for being loyal, but he pretends like he's some unbiased middle ground. And it's just absolutely disturbing. And Chael just has done this for so long now. I mean, how many years has Chael been doing this? He's been doing it forever. All he does is shill for the UFC, and he just puts out blatant UFC propaganda. And that's why, even though Francis Ngannou has gone out and done the impossible, he will continue to crap on him. Now let's look at the last couple clips. The next clip is Chael attempting to call out Ariel Helwani for celebrating Francis Ngannou's split decision loss, but he wasn't celebrating when he signed the Tyson Fury contract months ago. Let's take a look at that.
Your true intent, Ariel, with your big balls and all your courage, was to celebrate the $10 million that he got, which is all that he got. You would have done that 3 months ago when it was announced.
I did. I'll send you the clip.
Spirit of today,
I'll send you the clip.
Ariel, and the only reason your audience is still watching,
You're lying. You're lying.
Headlines
You're
today
lying, Chael. I did. I did it on July 11th.
It has to do
You're a liar.
with the competitiveness.
Okay,
the
Chael.
only reason you're talking
You want
about
to keep
a fight,
lying?
Ariel, you keep cutting me off.
Because you're lying.
I don't really understand
Chael,
why
you're lying. You are lying.
About what?
I
You
did
dumb
celebrate.
Son. I would strangle you if I was there. You come and talk to me mouthy like this,
Do
you
it.
little
Do it. Do
Ariel.
it. This is like a scene out of your
Say
movie,
that it's a
Mojob
lie
Diamonds.
because I'm saying you didn't do something.
I
if
did
it
it.
turned out you did, by the way, it would make me wrong.
So there you see Chael Sonnen just becoming increasingly more unhinged. And you can see it over the course of the last couple clips. And what you do when you don't have a sound argument, you start insulting someone and then you start threatening them. And that's exactly what Chael Sonnen has begun to do over the last couple clips. And in this clip, he starts saying, I'm going to strangle you. And you could tell Chael's actually a little bit annoyed with Ariel Helwani, and he's already been insulting him left and right. But the point is, Chael Sonnen tries to say, well, why didn't you celebrate this months ago? Why are you only celebrating it now? Why are you only taking a victory lap now? Ariel Helwani was celebrating it months ago. I was celebrating it myself. I did a whole video on the channel a couple months ago. People never thought Francis Ngannou was going to get this boxing match, and he got it, and he's getting the highest payday of his career. Ariel Helwani posted a clip from the MMA Hour from a couple months ago of him celebrating Francis Ngannou signing the contract to fight Tyson Fury. He posted a clip on his Twitter. I'll link it down in the description. But Chael is talking as if we are the dumbest people ever listening to him, because he says, Ariel says, you're lying, Chael. And Chael says, I'm not lying. I'm just wrong. If I'm not right, if I say something it's not right, I'm just wrong. I'm not lying. No, Chael, you're actively lying and trying to mislead people with your blatant UFC propaganda. Now, I have 2 more clips for you. Let's go to the last clip, the second to last clip. You have Chael calling Ariel a liar, and then Ariel calls him out for tweeting out a lie. Let's take a look.
10 to 20 million is 100% difference. It's not a prediction.
Well,
it's
I don't know what the numbers are. That's why I asked you. We could go back. How do I know?
You know the pay-per-view.
How do I know? I don't work for the worldwide leader. I don't work for them.
Man.
I don't have an inside source. And by the way,
you're a weirdo.
By the way, you are a liar because
and
you
a dishonest one, which I didn't know.
You tweeted on Saturday that you were at the event, and we just found out you weren't at the event. Was that not a lie, or
did I say that to you today?
No,
did I say
but
those
there's a habit of lying.
And how are you bringing it in?
Because you tweeted that.
How are you bringing it in?
So there's a habit. There's a habit.
But how
there's
would you bring that in? We're having a debate about today what we said. I didn't say these things to you today.
So there you hear Chael saying, Ariel, you lied earlier, because Ariel said Francis Ngannou made 10 to 20 million. I'm not sure if I showed you a clip of that earlier in the video, but essentially saying that's not true. He made 10 million. Well, we don't know the numbers on the pay-per-view buys. It could be much more. We don't know that yet. So that still remains to be seen. That's not necessarily a lie. Okay, maybe it's a little bit misleading from Ariel Helwani. But then Ariel says, why did you tweet that you were at the event and you weren't? And you can see Chael Sonnen gets noticeably annoyed. And that's because he's called out for lying, blatantly lying, which Chael Sonnen does time and time again. And he says a lot of stuff that people think he's joking, and they're like, oh, it's all part of the gimmick. Chael Sonnen, I believe, is a compulsive liar. He does it time and time again. Whatever he needs to do to keep his relevancy, that's what Chael Sonnen does. And you can tell when Ariel calls him out, why did you tweet you were at the event if you weren't actually at the event? And Chael's like, well, why are you bringing that into that? Are we bringing other things into this? We're supposed to be having a conversation about Francis Ngannou. And Chael just completely tries to divert from the situation. It's an absolute disaster interview for Chael Sonnen. And now the last clip I'm going to show you is Chael Sonnen getting pissed off, talking about bringing up Dana White again and Ariel's vendetta against Dana White, and then he just leaves abruptly. Let's take a look.
I came here to celebrate the good, not only with Francis, but with Tyson. You came here to tell a message to Dana White, which missed, like it always. I got to go. I hate hanging up. That's what punks do, but I got to go, man.
That's a weasel move. That's a weasel move.
And you're weak, Ariel. You're disgusting and weak.
That's all. Stand here. You're trying to leave.
Weasel.
You're trying to leave, and you keep insulting me. You keep insulting. Bring on the insults. Bring on the insults.
And then you called me the liar.
Some friend. You did lie.
You opened this by saying that it did 10 to 20 million, as reported. You could have said, I'm guessing, I think, but you didn't. You lied. This is your opening line. I'm not going back, Ariel, like you tried to do with things that have a different place that nobody here as your audience, our jury, can see. I went back to your first line. Your opening line to me, you lied.
Oh,
I called you out. You got caught lying. You said it did 10 to 20, and you said it was reported.
Yes, by me. By me. By me. By me.
And you're a little
by
weasel.
me.
Goodbye, Ariel.
Keep insulting. Yeah, there he is.
So there is the last clip I'm going to show you from the interview, and you just see Chael Sonnen throwing out more insults and saying, you're just trying to get a point across to Dana White, and it missed. And Chael Sonnen continues to just bring Dana White and the UFC into this. And what Chael should have done, basically I can sum up his entire argument by saying no promoter's going to sign Francis Ngannou unless it's a 3-fight deal, and the pay-per-views didn't do that well. It is an absolute bomb of an event, and the pay-per-view failed completely, and this will never happen again to any other fighters, and you're pushing this out to other fighters. That's essentially Chael Sonnen's entire argument. What he should have said is, this is a rarity in the sport. Chael Sonnen should have said that Francis Ngannou is the exception, not the rule. And I was shocked that this worked out for Francis Ngannou. I was wrong about Francis Ngannou. But instead, he doubles down repeatedly and just says, because you're covering this situation, because you're saying Francis Ngannou made smart moves, you're anti-UFC. It makes absolutely no sense. And Chael just embarrassed himself in this interview. He started off all right, and then it just got increasingly more unhinged as the interview went on. All he had to say was, I didn't expect this to work out in Francis Ngannou's favor. And Saturday night, when he boxed to a split decision against the heavyweight champion, all bets were off. And now Francis Ngannou is going to make a boatload of cash. Instead of saying, oh, well, no promoter's going to sign you unless a 3-fight deal, and the pay-per-views didn't do that well. When you have Saudi Arabia willing to throw out tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars for boxing events, all bets are off. Francis Ngannou, whether he boxes next, whether he goes to PFL, he made the smartest business decision for himself. And that's not because Ariel Helwani told him to. That's just not the case at all. Francis Ngannou guided his career in a way that he's going to be one of the highest paid people in combat sports ever, period. When he retires, he's probably going to have more money than Conor McGregor, arguably, at least made from combat sports, not in other ventures with different companies and whatnot. But imagine he gets 2 more boxing matches and maybe he wins one of them. He might be making $100 million over the next 2 fights. Think about how crazy that is. And people like Chael Sonnen want to have you believe that he shouldn't have done this. There's no way he should have done this. You can't be successful without the UFC. That is Chael Sonnen's message. Now, Ariel Helwani, is he basking in this because he's happy the UFC made a mistake? Sure he is. But Ariel doesn't have an effect on whether or not Francis Ngannou is going to attempt to get out of his UFC contract. Ariel Helwani can't get Francis Ngannou signed to a boxing deal against Tyson Fury. These were all moves. You're giving way too much credit to Ariel Helwani. These were all moves that Francis Ngannou was able to do, and he was able to take his career to a place where he's one of the most successful combat sports athletes of all time. And who knows what's next? Because it's not done just yet. He's a heavyweight. He's what, 37, 38? Heavyweights can fight until they're like 45, at bare minimum like 43. You've seen a John Anik, Glover Teixeira breaks through at 42. Who knows what the future holds for Francis Ngannou, and it may be bigger than any of us can even imagine. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.